but one inmate killing another inmate is not that unusual because, and often it's the high. That's why Epstein was probably the inmate in the United States most at risk of another prisoner stabbing him or killing him in some way.
Jeffrey Epstein's death is one of the mysteries of our time. Since his death in a New York City prison cell, there have been countless conspiracy theories, speculations, hypotheses, and conjecture. The official government response was to declare the death a suicide within hours of the news being leaked from the prison. However, only 2 medical examiners looked at Jeffrey Epstein's body to discover the cause of his death. In this episode of Crime Waves, we speak to one of those people. Dr. Michael Baden is a legend in American law enforcement. Formerly the New York City medical examiner, he was also appointed to the specially called commission after the 1971 Attica prison riots that left dozens of inmates and guards dead. He's had decades of experience, specifically on examining prison deaths, and he's been involved in a host of high-profile legal cases, including working for the family of George Floyd. And after examining Jeffrey Epstein's body, Dr. Baden says that the wounds indicate that Epstein was most likely killed by a person or persons unknown. It was murder. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in the world. I hope you're well and thriving. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Crime Waves. I'm Declan Hill, an associate professor of investigations at the Henry C. Lee College of Criminal Justice and Forensic Science. We're one of the world's best academic institutions to learn about police and detective work. Now, normally, each episode, myself and my students interview one of the world's best investigators. However, on this series about the Epstein death, my students have been transformed into investigators. I've taught them to organize their minds as good investigators, to build chronology, a list of questions, sources, and resources. They've poured over thousands of pages of documents. Their names are Alex Klein and Jake Zenger. I mention them because I want to give them credit where credit is due, but also because in one section of this interview, you're going to hear their voices and their questions. We spoke to one of the world's leading medical examiners on the Epstein case, and his findings and perspective on the investigation are pretty shocking stuff. Dr. Michael Baden is outspoken about his belief that the FBI investigation was not good and that the indications on Jeffrey Epstein's body were far more indicative of homicide than suicide. It was a far-ranging discussion with a lot of topics covered. However, before we get to it, a couple of program notes. First, please take a moment to rate, review the show. Also, if you're new to Crime Waves, I strongly urge you to take a listen to our earlier programs. There are some fantastic episodes. Let me just give you a few selections of some of them. There is America Runs on Corruption, featuring an interview with the incredible Sarah Chase. She worked for years in Taliban-controlled territory of Afghanistan, and she speaks about the outrageous corruption of the NATO coalition in that country that really catalyzed support for the Taliban. Then she returned to current-day America and discovered an equally grotesque corruption in this country. There's an episode, Solving the Unsolvable. Lisa Daddio, a former New Haven City Police lieutenant and one of my colleagues here at the university, speaks about how she helped solve a case of serial sexual assaults on women up and down the Atlantic coast. And then there's The Search for Black Sam, and that's featuring an interview with another colleague, Claire Glynn, on her forensic analysis on one of the greatest pirates in the history of the seafaring world. So please take a listen to them and other episodes, subscribe to the show, rate it. We're doing well. Crime Waves is now in the top 5% of all podcasts, but we would really like to take it up to the next level. So your help, subscriptions, and reviews are super important. And of course, if you have thoughts, observations, or ideas, please put them in the comments section. Feedback is a huge part of the process that we value, appreciate, and read all of your comments. Second, this specific episode is fairly gruesome. There will be a lot of discussion about body wounds and post-mortem examination of injuries. So if you're of a sensitive nature, I strongly recommend that you do not listen. And if you do, please be careful of playing the episode in front of children or anyone who might be unduly upset. Finally, most importantly, like all the episodes in this Epstein series, we will be referring to suicide. It's inevitable in the investigation of the Epstein death. Please, if you are considering self-harm, please don't. Please reach out to somebody, a family member, a friend, or counselor. Here in Connecticut, their number is 1-800-273-8255. That's 1-800-273-8255. Jeffrey Epstein's body was officially examined on Sunday, August the 11th, 2019. And there were two doctors in that room. The first was the New York City medical examiner of that day. That was the person who had drawn the awful Sunday morning shift on a hot New York City summer. And the other doctor was one of the most famous medical examiners in American police history, Dr. Michael Baden. And we began our interview by asking him what were the conditions like for that examination.
There was just one medical examiner on duty that day. She was very cooperative with me and with the family, and I was there with her when she did the autopsy.
And what, in a normal circumstance, one of these autopsies, I mean, we've all seen the Law and Order and all these TV programs, but how does it work? Is it a scrub down operating room, or what's the circumstances?
Well, in this circumstance, there's in the medical exams office in New York City, there's a regular autopsy room with about 6 tables, and a separate autopsy room where there's a single table that's used when the medical examiner wants privacy, or if there's the decomposed body, for example, where they don't want the odor to spread. So
Yes.
Miss Epstein was taken to the single autopsy room, the special autopsy room, and the medical examiners were there to do the autopsy.
And
And
what was
and had come directly from the hospital. So when he was found at 6:30 in the morning, he was brought from the cell. Instead of being left in the cell, which is the first error that was made, he was brought to the infirmary. Then he was EMS, ambulance service, picked him up from the infirmary, brought him to the hospital, where he was pronounced dead at the hospital, even though he was obviously dead when he was found. And then he was brought from the hospital to the medical examiner's office. And that all happened in a few hours. Well, that all happened during the day. That's on the 10th of August. And the autopsy is done the 11th of August, the next day.
Okay.
The next day. And so that when I was called by Mr. Epstein, the brother, I was in Sullivan County, knew that he was dead, actually, and then went down first thing on the Sunday morning when the autopsy was done. So he's found dead on Saturday.
Yes.
And then I heard about the death from uh, on television, and was called by the brother during the afternoon of Saturday and asked to come down, and he had arranged with the medical examiner's office as being the next of kin to have me present. And that was a Sunday morning. And then when I think the autopsy started around 10 o'clock in the morning.
And during that autopsy, was there anything that struck you when you were looking at Jeffrey Epstein's body?
Yes, there was the thing that struck me and the medical examiners. We were speaking during the whole time and going over
Yes.
things. She was very cooperative, and anything that I asked her to do to go over during the dissection, she accommodated immediately. What struck her and me was that there were multiple fractures of the larynx, of the windpipe. The hyoid bone was fractured in the left side, and the thyroid cartilage, the Adam's apple, was fractured on both sides. And this is very unusual for a hanging. It was reported to the medical examiner's office as a hanging suicide, is what the personnel at the jail had indicated. And there was a ligature mark around the neck, which was kind of high up for kind of not high for a hanging case, because usually the ligature will slide up under the upper part of the neck where it comes into contact with the mandible, the chin bone here, so that the ligature marks in free hanging cases are high above the windpipe, above the Adam's apple. This was right across the Adam's apple, which is a little unusual. And there were a lot of petechial hemorrhages, little ruptured blood vessels that we were looking at as he was on the table, on the autopsy table, with little petechial hemorrhages in the whites of the eye and around the skin of the eye, which is unusual in a hanging.
Why would that be unusual in a hanging?
Well, in a free hanging case, where the weight of the body, when I say free hanging, that the feet are not on the ground, which is most suicides that commit suicide that way, one way or another, they get higher up. The ligature goes down to the underside of the neck and compresses the carotid arteries and veins on both sides of the neck, with the weight of the body minus 10 pounds for the 11 pounds for the head. The head's 11 pounds. The rest of the weight of the body is on the ligature that's around the neck. And that's forceful enough to compress the carotid arteries and the veins so that no blood is going to the head, no blood. And the person in a hanging case has no petechial hemorrhages. The difference in manual strangulation, where it's most of interest, petechial hemorrhages, is that when the fingers are put on the neck,
yes,
in manual strangulation, the veins, which are low pressure, are completely compressed, but the arteries keep pumping some blood up into the brain. It doesn't completely occlude the arteries. So blood is being pumped up into the head and brain and can't get back to the heart because the veins are collapsed. The veins are just a few pounds of pressure compresses the veins. If you put it on the hand,
yes.
a little bit of pressure on the back of your hand that's hanging down, you'll see that the veins don't contain blood anymore.
So this is why it's significant when you see a different pattern of blood in the eyes, is that it indicates either hanging or strangulation.
When you see petechial hemorrhages in the eyes, in this
Yes.
kind of situation. There are a number of ways it can occur. Uh,
Right.
Particular hemorrhages can occur. A body is found face down, can because as after we die, the settling of red blood cells.
But that wasn't the
That,
case, evidently, with Mr. Epstein's body.
that's
It
correct.
was fine. Yeah.
That was not the case with the Epstein. He was his head was still up, and it was the pattern of the ligature around the neck that it hadn't gone all the way up under the skin. The multiple fractures, usually in 80% or so of hanging cases, suicide, there are no fractures because the compression is above the windpipe. If it's a broad ligature or certain kinds of wide leather ligature, it can be wide enough to compress and cause a fracture.
Right.
It's very unusual to find more than one fracture, and so unheard of to find three fractures. Three fractures are crush injury. Now, anything is possible. There's always exceptions to the rules, but uh, you'd have to go to many hundred hangings to get one that has three fractures.
So this is highly unusual.
It's a crush injury. It's a crushed type of injury with the hands or commonly. So
Is
this
it
type of
consistent?
injury is a concern. The particular hemorrhages and the fractures, yes, are more indicative of homicide than suicide.
Is it indicative of, for example, a karate chop across the neck? Because I
Um,
understand that's one way that a professional hitman works. That a quick chop across the thorax incapacitates the person and then is able to do what they want.
well, a karate chop can definitely cause that kind of fractures.
Yes.
Usually, you need a compression for a few seconds, or a minute or so to
Okay.
get the particular hemorrhages to. But that's the reason these findings to the doctor doing the autopsy and to myself watching and talking to her about it uh, uh, indicate that this is more from an autopsy point of view. Remember, there are a lot of other things going on about
Yes.
eyewitnesses, written, suicide notes, the way the person is handled in the hospital and all that have to be taken into account. But just from what was present on the autopsy, normally a suicide like this, if it were suicide, it'd be called a suicide right away. Person hanging and it's everything, no fractures, no particular hemorrhages, and some kind of indication, kind of indication the person was depressed. That's also part of the history in hanging, if as opposed to accidental or doing sexual activities, you can get this kind of thing. So that what the doctor did, who doing the autopsy, instead of putting suicide on, as they were told. I mean, the information coming from the prison, from the jail, was that this was a straightforward suicide. From all the other information that they had at that time, she put down pending further study because she wanted more information, since the findings at the autopsy around the neck, particularly, were more like a homicide than a suicide. That doesn't mean it automatically is. You have to get as much information as possible. So the initial death certificate was issued pending further study. About 4 days later, or 5 days later, her boss, the doctor's boss, the chief medical examiner, changed it from pending further study to suicide.
Why?
Well, that wasn't fully explained initially to the family. The family wanted to know why it was changed. It wasn't explained to the family. Or the chief medical examiner felt there was enough information to call it to a suicide after talking to the FBI people and other people about it. But I thought that was hoping that this would be clarified with the investigation that was being done by the Justice Department. See, the problem here is that suicides in jails and in prisons uh, are common, are a common cause of death, not common, but a common reason for people to die in custody. They're depressed, they get upset, and the New York City police has a lot of experience investigating such deaths. This was not a New York City problem; it was a federal problem. The federal problem meant instead of New York City police doing its usual routine, and the special commission that was set up after Attica, sending their investigators out to talk to all the people on the tier. You see, somebody dies in suicide, of hanging. There's
Yes.
always a concern. There's always a concern in prisons that there are a lot prisons and jails not only are there allegedly to protect the outside world from the bad guys who are incarcerated, but they also protect the bad guys from each other because there are a lot of animosities in prison, and as
Yes.
there are people who get homicides in prisons occur. And that's one thing that happens often with riots, like the Attica riot, that people will get even with each other during a riot and kill another person and then hang them up to make it look like suicide.
That's
So,
that's common, is it? Or I mean,
well, we don't have many uh, prison uprisings where prisoners get control of prison. Attica was one, and there were a number of other prison breakouts that occurred around that time, and it was not uncommon for somebody to get even with, like, three of the dead prisoners in Attica were killed by other inmates. You know
but
that for
but
various reasons.
Dr. Baden, that's the thing that struck the team here, the students and myself, is that we're perfectly willing to believe that there are killers and murderers inside a jail. That is that's the what jails are there for. But to have a specific skill set to be able to kill somebody and then hang them up and make a credible make it credibly look like suicide. Our thought was that this would be relatively rare to do.
Well, it depends on whether the other inmates can get access to somebody, uh, and usually, like there was the Chauvin, the police officer Chauvin, who's in the federal prison last week or something. He got stabbed by another prisoner. He didn't die, apparently. He didn't die. And it was known, it was seen and witnessed. So they knew that one prisoner gets another prisoner under normal conditions, it can be witnessed. But during a riot, I'm saying when a
Yes.
riot occurs and prisoners are free and get out of their cells, as Attica, that doesn't happen very often. But when it does happen, then there are a number of cases, documented situations where when the facility comes under control, they'll find somebody hanging, and it'll look like committed suicide. But that's one of the things that we're concerned about. We've had that in other prisons in New York State, where after the riot, these are before Attica. Since Attica, there have been no prison riots where people,
Yes.
but there were before that time. That's in 1971, and that one of the things that are looked for at the time of the autopsy. If you find somebody hanging, there's always a concern. Are there particular hemorrhages or not? Because if there are particular hemorrhages, one has to be make sure there's a proper investigation as to whether anybody else had access, could have done it. See, the other people would have had access because of the riot.
Right.
Normally, they don't have ready access. So normally, it would be hard to get somebody and hang them up. And the only way this could have happened in this situation would be if another inmate on the tier got into his cell and that the cell was not locked, that kind of a thing. Then this could happen, and that would be only if that was intentionally done, because so that the ability of inmates to get even with other inmates, even if for publicity. That is, I'm not sure with Chauvin why he was stabbed. That hasn't come out yet. Whether they had an argument in the prison or whether just one person, a person of high publicity, often is at risk. Like
Because you get
Epstein.
street cred in the prison by injuring him or knocking him off
That's
among
right.
the other bad boys.
That's right.
Um,
That is that can happen. So that setting up somebody like Epstein is very unusual. That would be very unusual. But one inmate killing another inmate is not that unusual because, and often it's the high. That's why Epstein was probably the inmate in the United States most at risk of another prisoner stabbing him or killing him in some way. I think it's certainly in the prison he was,
yes.
the facility he was. So there has to be special care taken of such prisoners, such as where they put them in the cell, who's in the cell with them. They're not put into general population in the prison as he was. But the problem there, you see, this is that he was put under psychiatric observation for about a day or two, and then taken off because there's a high incidence of generally high incidence of suicide in people who are newly arrested or in jail or get bad news. Bad news like prisoners who get news that their latest appeal in the prison was denied, or the girlfriend sends them a Dear John letter. That the prisons, these are long-term prisoners, are put under special observation because when they get bad news, the incidence of suicide is higher, as is when they put into jail. Remember, Metropolitan Correctional is a jail, for people who have not yet been convicted. So in jails, this is also common. A person gets arrested, put in jail, and in the first week or so, there's a high incidence of suicide of people who feel depressed, who once you get jailed, you might. It's a good reason to be depressed.
Right.
So these in jails and in prison, there's special care taken when there's a person is a possible risk at suicide or homicide.
Dr. Bond, let me just cut to the chase here, because I think after spending 2.5 months digging up research reports, investigations, really going, Alex and Jake have really done fantastic research here. Those are my students working on this particular podcast episode. What has shocked and surprised us is how bad the investigations were.
Well, I agree. I agree with you. And that's because the general public thinks that the FBI is great at homicides and things. And that's based on television, not on real practice. I mean, there's less than 1% of murders in the United States are on federal property, that are in federal VA hospitals or a jail like this, that's in a federal. So they're not and the FBI doesn't even have a medical examiner. There's no forensic pathologist associated with the FBI. If there's a death like this, a death in a federal prison, it goes to the local coroner. The local coroner or medical examiners happen to be in New York, but the investigation is done by the FBI, not by the local police.
So in this case, it would have actually been better if the New York Police Department had done it because they had experience in this. They've got a track record of solving these cases, but not the FBI.
Yeah, well, yes, and also this would have permitted one of the reasons that, as you read, that Attica, one of the results of Attica was that Governor Rockefeller set up a special commission to look into all deaths in police and in custody, all custody deaths, because one of the reasons for the Attica uprising, rioting, in which 43 people died, 10 being civilians, the guards, was that they complained that when prisoners died, they was covered up. That everybody coming out of the prisons came out with death certificates saying heart disease, when in fact some of the prisoners were beaten up and died of. Some died because they didn't get proper medical care. Some died because they were left in overheated conditions during the summer.
But Dr. Baden, in this particular case, the guys doing the investigation, the one that has shocked my team of students here and myself, that we don't think was particularly good, was FBI. And contrary to the Hollywood impression, the FBI actually doesn't have all that much experience in it. Let me ask you about one thing. One of the things that was purportedly found in Jeffrey Epstein's cell was 2 cloth nooses that were supposed to be tested for DNA. What's happened to that?
Well, no, when you say supposed to be, if this were done properly by the local police agency that have, when you have prisons in a community, prisons, jails, and lockups in a community, there's always going to be times when people commit suicide. I mean, that's one of the most common cause of death in corrections, suicide, because especially among young people, because they don't have natural diseases when they come in to die from. So in this situation, especially because nobody knew what happened, there was no eyewitness. See, at the very beginning, the very first day, it was found that he had not been looked at for about 8 hours or so. Right? He was contrary to being observed every 30 minutes or so, as happens in all prisons, to make sure person A is not too sick, and also the reason they do to make sure he didn't escape. I mean, one of the reasons is people, they try to escape, so that all prisons, jails have rules that you got to keep checking up on the prisoners, just so, and that they're not sick and having seizures or something. So they weren't looked at, and there was no statement made to how they were found. When the body came to the medical examiner's office, it was thought to be a suicide because there were ropes, the new ligatures on the made from the orange bed sheets, but there was no information as to how they were found. Were they hanging? Were they kneeling? Something? Did they fall off the top bunk with this thing on? Was raised. So that was no, and that clearly in that kind of a situation, the nooses, and there was some concern. These are smooth nooses, sheets. They're smooth, but the pattern on the lid, there was a imprint pattern on one area of the ligature mark on the neck, and it was a deep ligature dried mark, meaning that the person had to have been hanging with that pressure on it for some time. It took time for the ligature mark around the neck to become so prominent. So he'd been dead for a while, hanging.
Right.
And uh, what should have been done it would be to get the ligatures of that were there, yeah, on the ground. There was more than one, and to examine it for easily for DNA. Whose cells were on there? Were they on the cells of the decedent, which you'd expect if he's
Of course, yeah. Reportedly
but it
tied around
wouldn't
Jeffrey Epstein's
it,
necks.
it
But
wouldn't
somebody
be.
else's.
Yeah,
If there was a murderer.
that's correct. If there was somebody else's DNA on it, you can get fingerprints also from cloth, but the DNA
And
would have been easily
and
obtainable.
were those cloth ligatures were they examined
No,
or
and
by
not
the investigator?
according to all the reports from the FBI and that the ligatures were not examined.
Why
Period.
not?
Well, that's because they're being investigated. The FBI can be great on peripheral things, on use of telephones and cell phones that can be
Right.
very helpful. In this instance, they were able to find out very quickly that the videos weren't working, that the two guards were not doing what they were supposed to do, and had perjured themselves by saying they had. They checked off every 30 minutes, but then it turned out that, and then the two guards refused to report to discuss the findings with them. The videos didn't work, and two sets of videos didn't work. So, why
I
didn't they
find this.
work?
I
You know,
still find this profoundly shocking. And you had a story that you were telling me about when you did the investigation of Marlon Brando's son. Could you share that one, please?
Oh, with Marlon Brando's son. Marlon Brando's son was arrested for shooting the boyfriend of his sister because they had a confrontation because the boyfriend had slapped the sister, or
Okay.
beaten the sister. So allegedly, what happened? The son, Brando's son, uh, came up to the boyfriend who was asleep on a cat, who was on the couch
Yes.
in the house watching television that night, and wound up shooting him. The son had a gun. There was a shooting. Uh, the son said, "I came over to threaten him that not to strike my sister," and he reached out and grabbed my hand, and it went off accidentally, is what the son said. What the police had said is they find the guy dead on the couch, lying on the couch, and that he had come over and shot him while he was asleep on the couch. Was
Right.
why he was homicide arrested. After about a week, I got a call from out of the blue from Brando. I'm in New York City. He's in Los Angeles. That he's concerned. He, the father's concerned that they hadn't found the bullet. See, the decedent had been shot. There was no bullet in the body. It was an in-out bullet wound of the neck, and they had done a searched the room and everything where it happened, the couch, the furniture where it happened. They couldn't find the bullet. They didn't find the bullet. So I got up there and looked around and met Brenda, and take the room where the death was. And if this is what I had spoke to you about, I could tell when I walked into the room, and it had all kinds of things around that the police had looked for. There was a shag rug on the floor. And I'd been through this before in New York City with shag rugs, that shag rugs don't show bullet holes. The only way you can find a bullet under a shag rug is to sit down, to lie down, to kneel on it and feel. You have to feel it. Police don't like to do that. Usually if there was a shag rug there, it obviously hadn't been pulled up. So I got down on my knees and feeling it, and I felt the bullet. I made an incision, and there was the bullet right underneath it. A sergeant comes over to get the
Yes.
bullet. And when I give the bullet to the sergeant, I say to the sergeant, look, this is at that time was a very high profile case. And I remember this, I'll never forget this sergeant, the old timer, he looked at me almost with a tear in his eye. He says, look, Doc, if you don't do a good job every day, then when something important comes along, you can't do a better job. When we're doing autopsies in New York City, whether the guy came from the Bowery or was a bum or was a president of a company, we had to do the same as good a job as we can. But you can't just turn it on for important cases, and if you don't do it for every case.
So to return to the Jeffrey Epstein case, and this is my last question, I'm going to hand it over to my students, but Jeffrey Epstein at that time was the most high profile inmate in the American prison system.
Yes.
He is found dead. You look at the autopsy, you say it indicates in all probability this is more likely to have been a homicide than a suicide. And you would expect an investigator, a really rigorous investigation.
Yes.
And that didn't happen. And
No.
4.5 years later, we're still waiting for that. I went through with my students the Department of Justice report that came out this June, and we're shocked at how inadequate it was. What were some of the things that you saw when you looked at that report?
Yeah, when I looked at the report, what was interesting about it to me was that there was no investigation into the cause of death. That is, they just accepted what the medical examiner, what they said. It's one page or 2 pages that the medical examiner, not the chief medical examiner, actually, was it?
Yes, but the one who was doing the autopsy with you or in your
was the
presence.
one they would talk to finally, but that excuse me, that had explained to them why the findings were not due to homicide. The main reason they give is because there's no injuries. There were no other injuries on
Jeffrey Epstein's body,
therefore, he
indicating a
didn't
struggle or
struggle.
something like that.
Therefore, he didn't struggle. Therefore, it had to be self-inflicted suicide. That's nonsense. When
Right.
people hang somebody else, or when the police, this is one of the things when the police put a chokehold around the neck, the carotid sleeper hold, then the person can die and there's absolutely no injuries at all. The person having a look, even you see this in the old movies sometimes, and
Yes.
When the mafia strangles somebody in the front of the car, from behind.
Yes.
There's never any marks on the body. There's just a ligature mark on the neck. So I think
and one presumes if Jeffrey Epstein were sleeping, there'd be even less likelihood to be any struggle.
That's correct. If he was sleeping, if he was grabbed from around the neck, from behind, and then hanged up, there would be no marks other than the ligature mark on the neck. Yes, I agree with that.
I'm going to hand it over to Alex now, and then Jake. Alex, you've been following this case now for 2.5 months. You've been looking, you've been reviewing some of the things. What is one of the questions that you'd like to ask Dr. Baden?
I'd like to go back to the high one about how these fractures would only, do these fractures occur in most cases, as you were saying, or how it was unusual how multiple fractures are happening? And, as you just stated, how in like mafia cases and these kind of strangulations, sometimes there's no marks at all. So in your expert experience, would that state how there would be considerable pressure applied to his neck because of, these fractures and marks that were found?
Yes, in order to get fractures of the Adam's apple and the hyoid bone, which is immediately above the Adam's apple, has to be pressure in that area, which happens with the fractures here were Y on the side of the upper part of the Adam's apple, and the fracture of the left hyoid bone was above it and more in the midline. The different pressures put by fingers that cause those fractures. A ligature is in somebody hanging goes above it and wouldn't cause a fracture. This ligature goes across. Now, in the cases where you see that somebody comes from behind and quickly pulls a ligature, and the person loses consciousness right away, there's enough loss of consciousness to cause brain damage and death, but the heart can keep circulating blood for a few minutes while they're in coma. So the petechiae can develop there, but it's just very unusual. And here the mark around the neck is also across the Adam's apple, not above it. And it's much more common and much more typical for any fractures, is more typical for crushing compression with hands, usually, than with ligature, a thin ligature around the neck. If it was a thick ligature, thick belt could extend from the under the surface across the Adam's apple, and that can cause one fracture. But two fractures is unusual. Three is rare as heck.
So this is really unprecedented to see three fractures in that bone and it to be linked with suicide. Jake, you've really done a lot of work on this. You prepared some questions. Let's walk our way through those questions. Please go for it.
Okay, so just a few clarifying questions at first. You mentioned pretty early on that you felt like the first mistake within the case was them not leaving his body in the cell where it was found. And just reviewing like prison protocol, I think I read a document from the Bureau of Prison Systems that kind of basically said exactly what you said. The first thing that you're supposed to do in a case like that where there's a body found hanging is you examine it within the cell, correct? Rather than leave the
outside. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And you're absolutely right. If there's any kind of concern that the person might still be alive, then you cut it down and test further. But if the person is dead, if there's not breathing, the body should be left in the cell, because the time of death is always important. Always important when there's death in prison was who was the last person to see him, and people having alibis and all that. So the time of death is important. The only time you can test for rigor mortis, lividity, the temperature of the body, which are the three ways that you tell the time of death, is at the scene before the body is moved away. So if this were a police case in New York, they would have left the body there for the medical examiner to come to the scene and test for rigor mortis and look for lividity and take a temperature.
Two more questions. Just, I wasn't really aware that the FBI does not have its own medical examiner. Is there a reason for that? Just, is it because they don't tend to deal with that many deaths and their work is tailored around other cases, or?
Well, the FBI is terrific on certain technologies involved: fingerprints, hair analysis, toxicology. They have great toxicology. They do not have a medical examiner system in the a forensic pathology system in the FBI. They rely on the local coroners, or there is a federal medical examiner in the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology that they can call in. That's training in the military case, but they don't have. And usually they're not the first ones present. Usually the FBI is called in, like in many of the cases you've seen in the media, afterwards, after the autopsy is done. Remember, the autopsy is going to be done in the first, hopefully, in 24 hours. So the FBI is not usually happen, as you see in their report, that they're very good on finding out if the videos were cut or not cut. They didn't even, what concerned me is they didn't even interview the other inmates on the tier. I think they refer to one inmate that said that, well, he didn't see anything because they have very narrow windows at midnight. But they didn't interview the tier to see was there any fuss there. Were all the doors locked? Remember, in the facility, in that jail, an old time jail, it's not an electronic system where you can you can shut down all the doors to the cells by electronically. It uses the old the old key lock, the Adams key or the Folger Adams key, which is popular around the country, where each door had to be individually locked. So what happens if at 8 o'clock at night, when apparently they're in their cell or something, if one of the doors is left open, and his door and Epstein's door is left open, there'd be no record of that. There's no electronic record of that. So one of the issues was brought up is, could one of those inmates or somebody have done, had the ability to go from his cell into Epstein's cell? But that's beyond my call. My expertise is the cause of death, and what I'm saying is on the cause of death, it's unusual, very unusual, to be suicide, hanging, had to be neck compression. That's not 100%. There can always be exceptions to something, but I've not in 50 years seen that kind of exception in all of the suicidal deaths. Over 1,000 deaths that we've had in New York, all the New York prisons since Attica. And that it's unusual enough to require a full investigation as the cause of death. But what they did with what the FBI did is they did a lot of the other stuff on the videos and all. But the only person they interviewed about the cause of death, was the person who did the autopsy.
Okay. And then last question. Near the end of our original interview before this question segment, you referenced a pattern ligature around its neck. So the word like pattern being used there, is that the pattern that you found on it different? Like it didn't line up with kind of the wide flat noose that was used to hang himself? Was the pattern that was found maybe of like a different material rather than a wide, like smooth bed sheet?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Very good observation. The bed sheet is smooth. The bed sheet doesn't leave a pattern. It's just a flat a furrow. There's a portion, if you look on I think the right side, if we get of the autopsy pictures that have been released already, there's a little imprint, a pattern. When I say imprint, it's an imprint. There's a compression of the skin in a little boxy pattern that doesn't match the sheet, that couldn't be produced by a sheet. Now, when people are strangled, they say with sheets or hanged with, if they have a chain or around their neck, that gets caught up in the sheet, and you leave a pattern in an ordinary suicide where somebody has a chain around the neck. You get the imprint of the chain on the skin. Here, there's an imprint, a little imprint on the, I think it's the right side of the neck, front right side, that doesn't match the smoothness of the sheet ligature, or of the ligature sheet, even if it was crumpled. You can have crumpling of the ligature too. This was some straight marks that looks like it could be from a different object.
I actually noticed that before discussing with you, going through the autopsy photos. The abrasion on that side of his neck seemed to be more red than the rest of his neck, kind of whiter. It did seem different than the rest of his neck after going through the photos of the autopsy.
Well, the problem with photos also color. You see, you always have to be careful about color photos because that depends on camera angles, on how it gets reproduced, on the light that's going on around. But what impressed me was the imprint being there was some straight lines in the imprint that couldn't be from a crumpled sheet. That's another thing to look into. All the more reason why examining the ligature with DNA or even for fingerprints would be important and easily done. The FBI does that all the time. So that why it wasn't done here, all you do is you take people. First of all, the FBI, everybody uses gloves because they don't want to get HIV or something, you know. So with the gloved hand to put it into a bag or a container and send it to the lab, and they can then easily look for DNA and see if there's any DNA that shouldn't be there.
That's all that I have. Thank you.
So, the,
Dr. Baden, one final question. I really want to thank you for your time. We really, really appreciate this. The sum up question: what has surprised or shocked you the most in this entire Jeffrey Epstein case?
well, I think what shocked me the most is that given not just the death of Epstein, but the significance of his death, with all the questions around it and all the prominent people who had a lot to lose if he were to testify at a trial or something, that this is concerning, that he wasn't given proper observation.
The prison guards, the specific prison guards, had so clearly faked these records for weeks and months. You know, it wasn't like they started faking their records when they were looking after America's most known inmate. They had clearly a consistent pattern of fraud and outright corruption inside the Metropolitan Correctional Center. That's the one that shocked me.
I agree with you too. There's that how guards could this goes through more than one shift of guards.
Yes.
I think that not to look at check somebody out, it takes 5 minutes to make their rounds, and that the other inmates on the tier were not individually questioned about what was going on in the tier. Did they hear anything, you know, that was going
Staggering.
on?
Just, I mean, you would do that for a normal shooting, a homicide shooting. You'd go into passerby shops, wherever. Did you see anything? And that wasn't done in this locked room. This thing. One of my students had a great
may
line.
I make one last answer to that?
Please.
To my mind, this all looks that you've got to really look for intentionality. But going back to the Marlon Brando incident, if they do a lousy job all the time, if this is the way these guards always did things, and were allowed to do things, to do shopping, you know, and to watch on their internets and all that kind of thing, rather than checking on the inmates, could be just incompetence that has been going on for a long period of time. But it certainly looks terrible when there's so many people who would have liked to do that to Epstein.
Hey, it's Declan here. Thank you for listening to this feature interview with Dr. Michael Baden on the death of Jeffrey Epstein. If you have any questions or thoughts on this episode, please put it in the comments, and please rate, review, or subscribe to the show. It's massively important. As a university, we of course receive no outside money, sponsorship, or advertising revenue. We do not believe in it. Therefore, all our ratings we get come from listeners like you. So please help us raise the profile of the show. I say this because the next case, what we're going to feature on Crime Waves, is even more important and far more controversial than the Jeffrey Epstein death. However, only a very small fraction of people know about it. We call it the greatest unsolved murder mystery in the world. It's a case that, if it had been solved in a timely manner, might have saved the lives of hundreds of thousands of people. It was definitely a murder, and to this date, no one has been caught. My students and I investigated it and will show you all the people who might have been involved. It's a shocking scandal that affects us all. So stay tuned, that will be airing shortly. In the meantime, please rate, review the program, go back to other episodes and listen to them. You're going to discover some gold there. Thanks again for listening.